Hello, I'm Jo Chamberlain, the Executive Director of the Coastside Land Trust, and we're delighted to welcome you today to our continuing community-free community webinar series. And today we have with us Stephanie Frischie, and she's an agronomist and plant ecologist currently with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. And we are delighted to have her with us today. Before I turn over the audio here for her to tell you way more than I'll probably be able to remember, I'd like to just do a little bit of logistics with you. So the webinar is being recorded and you will receive it in an email with a link on Monday. And if you have any questions, it's also available on the website. And please do contact us with any follow-up questions. And we'll be happy to work with Stephanie and get those answered for you. Please consider making a donation to continue to provide these wonderful and educational and environmentally rich programs for you. And at about 10:45, we will change over and Stephanie will take questions. If you would like to get your questions in early, at the bottom of your screen under Q&A, you can go ahead and start typing those at any point during the presentation. And so with that, I thank you very much for joining us. Stephanie is a wealth of information, and she has provided this skill and this wonderful environmental health, both in North America and South America, with extensive work with several organizations. And she prides herself in having restored over 8,000 acres to health and vibrance, just exactly what we need in a time when we know our climate and our world, our living world is challenged, just as we are. So Stephanie, would you like to share a little more about yourself before you get started?
Yeah, thanks for that introduction, Jo. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm glad to be here together with everyone, together remotely. I am Stephanie Frischie, and as Jo said, I am an agronomist and a plant ecologist. And for those of you who may not know, agronomy is the sciences related to farming. So that includes crop sciences, plant breeding, soil science, meteorology, those kinds of things. And I think as we go through life, we wear many different hats and we acquire many experiences and skills. And agronomy is, for me now, back in my undergrad days, I was interested in working in Latin America in sustainable agriculture and biodiversity. And I always liked plants. So that's how I ended up pursuing that as a degree. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, but then have always also been interested in conservation and really working on ways that agriculture can follow more of nature's model or example. And I worked 11 years in prairie restoration with the Nature Conservancy in Indiana on tallgrass prairie. And now with the Xerces Society, I continue to kind of wear a couple hats, both as agronomist and plant ecologist, and working with native seeds and native plants and creating habitat and natural communities for wildlife. And I'm an active member of my local land trust here, coming to you from Indiana. But as Jo said, my work is across North America and a few other continents. So. All right, we're gonna get to know the life in soil a bit today. So let me, just give you a bit of background to the organization that I'm with. I'm with the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. We're a science-based nonprofit focused on invertebrate conservation. We work in terms of education, outreach, applied research, policy, a lot of technical assistance, and ecological restoration to protect invertebrates and their habitats. We are based in Portland, Oregon, but have staff in many, many states. And our name Xerces comes from the butterfly pictured here, the Xerces blue. And sadly, it's the first butterfly in the US to go extinct due to human activities. This butterfly actually lived in the San Francisco area and its habitat was developed and it became extinct. And Xerces was founded around 50 years ago to prevent any future extinctions of butterflies from happening. So what started out as a very small group of passionate butterfly conservationists has now grown to over 60 staff, and we work across programs like reducing the use and harmful impacts of pesticides. Our pollinator team is the largest team in the world working on pollinator conservation and habitat. We also have an endangered species team, which focuses a lot on Western monarchs, bumblebees, fireflies, mussels, and even earthworms. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later this morning. And part of our education and outreach team is publications, our ambassadors program, the Bee City program, and we also work in urban conservation. I want to first highlight, this is a publication that's available as a free PDF download from our website, or if you just want to search Xerces Farming with Soil Life, you'll find it. But a lot of the material that I'll be covering in the next few minutes is drawn from this publication that we published last year. We've also, in 2021 and on into the future, we offer periodic online 4-hour short courses on this topic. So today we're just going to have about 45 minutes, but if you're interested in going deeper, you can get in touch to learn about when our next online course will be happening. So the brief outline for today is a bit of introduction. I'll cover some soil animal profiles and then management practices that support soil life and those that are not so good for soil life. Talk about a couple methods for scouting and then share some more resources to learn more, and also hold some time at the end so we can have some conversation and questions and answers. I normally share case studies in this presentation, but just in the sake of time, we're going to skip that today. So to zoom out a little bit at what is known about the animal kingdom, that's what's shown in the pie chart here. And green colors are the non-invertebrates, and everything else are invertebrates. And then of invertebrates, you can also just see how many species insects comprise. With so much diversity, then it's not surprising that the fate of the world's insects is really inseparable from our own. If we look at them from how they help the planet function, they're important for soil health in the ways that they work in nutrient cycling and decomposition. They manage pest populations by the fact that they have to eat too. Insects also turn plants into food for other animals. So caterpillars are one of the main food sources that bird parents use when they're feeding their young chicks at the nest. It's a high protein, highly nutritious food source. And of course, all those caterpillars, whatever species they are, have been feeding on plants. And through pollination, insects also help plants reproduce. Through pollination of our food crops, they also are turning those plants into food for us human animals. But increasingly, as research is looking at insect populations, there's this documentation of the global disappearance of insects. Insect biomass declined by 76% in German nature reserves during this 30-year period. And that was in nature reserves where you would expect kind of the best case scenario. Pollinators are also in decline. By one estimate of a global intergovernmental report, 40% of pollinator species may be at risk of extinction in the coming years. And some of the predators as well, like the tiger beetle pictured here. A study showed that a third of tiger beetle species and subspecies are sufficiently rare enough to be considered threatened or endangered species. So I chose to focus on 3 groups here: the fireflies, pollinators with a bee photo, and then a predator here with a beetle photo. And all of those are soil insects, as we'll learn. We see them in their stages when they're in the air, on the plants, above the soil, but parts of their life cycle are also in the soil. That's a teaser about them. What is known about kind of the status of soil invertebrates? So these are the soil-dwelling larval stages of flying insects. They represent a major biodiversity pool in terrestrial ecosystems, but in research, they've been woefully neglected in many biodiversity databases and assessments, as well as in conservation actions and policies. And given that a major fraction of invertebrates live below the ground, and considering their significant functional role, biodiversity monitoring urgently needs to include soil organisms and functions. So yeah, the soil is right here beneath our feet, so to speak, but it's still this unknown or fairly unknown realm relative to other ecosystems on our planet. This slide shows the 4 main categories or causes of insect decline: habitat loss, pesticides, disease and non-native species, and climate change. And then below each of those arrows are the main action or response that can be taken to help reduce the impact of those causes. So we can, of course, conserve and create habitat. We can reduce reliance on pesticides. We can reduce the risks from managed pollinator species. Both of those, reducing reliance on pesticides and reducing managed pollinator species, tie back to habitat. If there's healthy habitat and a place for native wild pollinators and natural enemies to live, then that can help reduce the need for pesticides and managed pollinators. And then likewise, trying to address and live in the future of climate change as best as possible is also tied back to planning for species and habitat diversity. Right, a bit then about soil. The more that I learn and think about soil, it's just really magnificent. From a perspective of human utility, though, there are several main functions of soil. When we categorize or talk about it, so it's a medium for plant growth and habitat for wildlife. It's the place where water supply regulation and filtration occurs. Also where recycling and storage of organic matter happens. And then again, from a real perspective of human utility, it's what we build on top of and with in many cases, whether it's roads or towns or cities and buildings. Soil scientists kind of use different characteristics and ways of classifying soil. So there are physical traits that soil have. There are chemical ways of measuring or categorizing soil. There are some biological ways. And then when a combination of these kind of lead to what color is the soil, how old is the soil, and all of these factors then are used by soil scientists to just like living organisms, there's a taxonomical hierarchy for soils. And some of the main levels that are used are orders and series. So I've got a question there for all of you, just to think about, in your head. Wherever you are at your place, do you know what the soil type is? Like, do you actually know the soil series name? Think about that. And then the other kind of food for thought ideas, maybe you know the soil texture, and that would be like, is it sandy? Does it have more clay? Does it have more silt particles, or kind of a balance of all of those, in which case it's called a loam. Okay, so again, just reflect on the soil series of where you are, or maybe the soil texture or other characteristics of the soil. We can circle back and talk about those in the Q&A. Yeah, if you are familiar with the soil series, or if you'd like to learn more just about soil characteristics, these are a couple of resources I wanted to let you be aware of. So the first is Soil Web. This was developed by UC Davis and NRCS, and it's specific to California. And the website is there underneath this image. And I went ahead here and zoomed in on Half Moon Bay. And when you click there, then you'll get a little pop-up window and that link to the web soil survey. So then if you choose that, you get taken to this other more national tool or website. This is the Web Soil Survey, which is developed and maintained by the Department of Agriculture and the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. And there are several tabs there across the top. And then what is circled in yellow are some of the different tools you can click with to either zoom in or zoom out or pan or find information. You can also bound the map and define your AOI, which is area of interest. And so I also went ahead and zoomed in even further here in part of Half Moon Bay. And then I defined the area of interest. That's the turquoise box that you see there. And then I moved over to the other tab for soil map. And you see the menu in the panel that opens up there. And so it's kind of showing you which areas have been defined or labeled or categorized as the coastal beaches, or the Denison coarse sandy loam, nearly level. What percent of that, like within this square that I've drawn, which of course includes some of the ocean. So there's that, but you just kind of get this overview of which soil series are in the box that you've defined. And then you can further click on, like that Denison coarse sandy loam, and that'll take you even further into this tool to continue learning. So our title for today's webinar includes soil health, and many people may have kind of their own definition of that, but a good working definition is the continued capacity of a soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. And the image here is, I think, nice, simple, but pretty comprehensive and inclusive. So the two quadrants that are on the right side are really addressing how to protect the soil. That's minimizing disturbance and maximizing soil cover. So minimizing disturbance is, again, from an agricultural perspective or even urban or wild lands. Minimizing disturbance is reducing tillage or movement of the soil, or removal of vegetation, which is also part of maximizing soil cover, that it's covered by living vegetation or by that organic matter or litter. And then the left side quadrats are really about feeding the life in soil. So, there's sun, there's plants, there's photosynthesis. They can make all these carbohydrates, which are the sugars and the source of energy that almost all of our life forms use, are carbon-based life forms. So plants are really the starting point of getting sugar and energy into that soil ecosystem. So if you've got continuous living roots, that's part of feeding the life in soil. And then maximizing the above ground biodiversity. So not just roots of one species, but roots of many species, and also animals, whether that's wildlife or livestock. Those are part of feeding the life in soil. Right, we've got some of these wonderful illustrations throughout the presentation, which are courtesy of Dr. Jim Nardi, a soil scientist at the University of Illinois, and obviously a gifted illustrator. It's difficult to see these organisms and for us to try to picture them. So I'm just really grateful to have resources like this that can show, obviously you would never see this many organisms concentrated in real life, but we can kind of get a glimpse of who's where and what they look like. I'm going to have this image up here a little bit later also, but 1 teaspoon of soil is estimated to contain more individual living organisms than there are people in the world. This is, obviously really small organisms, but bacteria, several thousand protozoans, nematodes and many fungal filaments and other like tiny microfauna. Fungi and bacteria are totally different kingdoms outside of the animal kingdom, but I'm not focusing on those today. There's a lot, of course, written. They're very important to soil health and life in soil. But our work with Xerces as an invertebrate conservation group, we're focused again on the soil invertebrates there. So bacteria are the most abundant soil organism in terms of biomass. They're part of this carbon cycling as well as nitrogen cycling. And then fungi are also very abundant. They're part of decomposition and regulating pathogens. And probably most relevant is that they form associations with the roots of plants and help those plants absorb water, nutrients, and tolerate drought. This is a simplified food web image here, and I want to show this to just illustrate the flow of energy. So the green arrows show the direction and relationship of energy flow, again in the form of carbon, between these groups of organisms. This is not showing living plants and their roots or larger animals, but it's zeroing in on the organic residues. They're in that green triangle in the lower left. It's mostly dead or shed material from plants and animals. And then if we look at the bacterial groups here, those are circled in orange. So they're feeding on the organic residues. And there's some movement up to protozoans and rotifers and nematodes, but they're relatively short networks. Then when we look at how fungi connect to these meso and macro-sized soil invertebrates, you can see that they're really important in our food web as well. The lower right that I haven't highlighted, these are also invertebrates, but they're the non-arthropods, and I will talk about them in a little bit too. There's all this diversity of soil animals, and they're also doing so many things. Again, just to summarize, they cycle nutrients, they build soil structure, and that in turn helps improve water infiltration and storage of water in the soil. The animals in the soil are enhancing plant productivity or health. They're also involved in regulating climate because of bigger water and carbon and nitrogen cycles. They help balance the populations of other organisms. They're pollinators, and they're also a food source for larger wildlife. Okay, so yeah, back to this image here. Soil animals represent nearly 25% of all the known diversity, of the total diversity of all known organisms. This conceptual illustration, it's not to scale, but it's just showing the smaller sized organisms at the bottom, and then increasingly going up to larger bodied organisms at the top. In each group, it's like rough, you can just see how many orders of magnitude in terms of number of individuals there are of these groups. So soil life is composed of creatures big and small, and they all live in this intricate web of interdependence and interaction. Some of these fill the role of decomposers. They're breaking down plant and animal matter into smaller pieces that bacteria and fungi can then use or access. Some of them are enriching the soil, again, by incorporating these broken down pieces of organic matter and minerals between the soil layers, and this influences soil structure and fertility. And the engineers are physically tunneling into the soil. They're bringing subsoil surface to higher layers of the soil profile, and this is also part of helping to hydrate and aerate the soil. This is also one of Jim Nardi's illustrations. Again, just conceptually kind of showing how things originate with plants, but then flow in other directions and go up through the animals, and then will die and become decomposed, and then picked up and processed through the scavengers and the decomposers. Okay, we're going to get into our soil invertebrate profiles next. So here's just a range of the diversity of animals we're going to talk about next. So tardigrades, these are an invertebrate, but not yet in the group of arthropods. They're so small, they live in the water film, and you do need a microscope to view them. Some of the other common names for them are water bears, and that's just because of their affinity or need to live in water, and kind of for their stubby legs with these claw-like appendages on them. And so again, they're associated with water films, and in the leaf litter, they're predators and scavengers, and they're eating bacteria, protozoa, nematodes, rotifers, fungi, plants, and algae. Lots of little small pieces or small organisms. Nematodes, this is just an amazingly diverse group. I think many of us, or myself at least, I first learned about nematodes as a plant pest or a crop pest. And some of them are, but they've got these different mouth parts that you can see illustrated here. The one on the left there is a bacterial feeder, and it kind of has these lips that will help it to grasp its food. The one in the middle is one that's going to feed on plants, has that sucking kind of needle-like mouth part. And then the one on the right is really a predator with kind of sharper, tooth-like mouth opening there. The life cycle of nematodes, many of them have separate sexes. Some are hermaphroditic. Again, they're associated with water films, and they can enter cryptobiosis. Tardigrades can as well. That's sort of this suspended state of animation, where if it's really hot, really dry, really cold, they can just kind of shut down for a while until things get better, and they can survive many months, and even years under those conditions. And then the lower picture here is like another pretty cool thing. Fungi can even trap nematodes, so it goes both ways. The nematodes just aren't doing all the eating themselves. Fungi can catch them and consume them as well. Earthworms, okay, another animal with a tube-like segmented body. The clitellum is that thicker band, and it's closer to the head end, so that's one easy way to tell which end is which for an earthworm, and that's where the reproductive organs are as well, within the clitellum. So yeah, as we probably mostly know, earthworms burrow within the soil, and they're consuming leaf litter as well as processing some of the mineral parts of soil. They can improve soil porosity and increase water infiltration and nutrient transformation. And again, they're one of these engineers where they're just moving an impressive amount of soil. But about 1/3 of the worms in the US are introduced species. It's just the Pacific coast and a few of the eastern states that have native species. A lot of both areas that have been glaciated, like lost all their native worms. They were wiped out, like where I am in northern Indiana. We don't have any native worms for the last 10,000 years because glaciers wiped them out. But we do have earthworms, but those are all introduced species that either got here by accident or they're used for fishing bait, and then they get released out into the environment and spread. There are even several rare earthworms, like the Oregon giant earthworm is a species of conservation concern. Again, is another native one. Arthropods then. So these now are the invertebrates that have exoskeletons, have segmented bodies, and jointed appendages. So we see these include insects as well as some non-insects. But just to recap or review here, arthropods are also grouped between their type of metamorphosis. So there's incomplete metamorphosis, where the eggs are laid, those eggs hatch, and you have the nymphal stage, which is just like small or immature adults. And then those will grow and go through several molts until they get to the full adult reproductive stage. Then on the right, a lady beetle is shown as the example of an insect group that lives through complete metamorphosis. So eggs hatch into larvae, the larvae pupate, and then what emerges from that pupa or chrysalis is the reproductive adult. Springtails, these are one of the more charismatic and fun soil invertebrates. They're pretty small, but you can see these with the naked eye. And some are longer bodied and some are more rounded in their shape. And they have this special structure called furcula, which really propels them like a catapult, or helps them spring or just move around or escape predators that way. And that's what their common name comes from. So they're, on the upper surface of the soil and in the leaf litter, they're decomposers in general. Some of them are predators, and they're eating all of these kind of smaller sized pieces of plants, fungi, and animals. There's a nice video on YouTube that shows a springtail springing, and I'm not going to try to play that now, but I think Kate has a link for it that she may put in the chat if you want to open that up, separately on your browser, or we'll also be sure to include that link in our post-webinar materials. Okay, I'm going to skip a little bit here. Of course, we have wood lice or roly-polies, another group that is commonly seen in many, many habitats, and these are decomposers. Millipedes, so these have 2 legs per body segment, and they're also primarily decomposers. And then the centipedes, 1 pair of legs per body segment, and these are mostly predators. So they're more fast moving, and that's again because they're usually chasing their food down, unlike the millipedes that are just munching away at the plant parts they find. And spiders, of course, an incredibly diverse group that live in many kinds of habitats and places, but they have 2 body regions and 8 legs and different groupings of multiple eyes. And some are hunters, like actively hunting, like the jumping spider, or wolf spider. Others build webs, whether it's an orb weaver or a funnel kind of web that's shown here. So these are just all around general purpose predators. They'll overwinter as adults or as eggs in the soil, in the leaf litter, in old stems, and under bark. And they're actually slow to reproduce. They only produce 1 generation per year, and an adult may live 1 to 3 years as an individual. And many of them, provide maternal care. You can see the inset here of a wolf spider. So after her eggs hatch, all those little baby spiders will hold on to the back of her abdomen and kind of ride around with her for protection until they're larger. All right, then we're going to move here into insects, kind of going up in taxonomic order. So these invertebrates have 3 body regions: the head, thorax, and abdomen. And on the thorax, there are 3 pairs of legs. These will just have 1 pair of antennae, and many of them, at least as adults, have wings. Again, over half of all known species are insects, so huge group of life on our planet. Many of these insects live in the soil, or they have a portion of their life cycle in the soil, and 80% of all soil animals are insect species. So there's so many of them. I'm just going to be able to highlight a few of those here.
Thank you. And just maybe a 10-minute warning. So you have some
All
time.
right, fantastic. Thanks for that, Kate. Yeah, great. So flies, we love to hate them, but they do all kinds of amazing, important things. Mosquitoes are flies, but there are also crane flies that are important for decomposing leaf litter, dance flies, non-biting midges, the long-legged fly, that was the top row here. And they're actually pretty beautiful when you can get up close to them and look at them. And then of course, they're really critical to decomposition. Just focusing here on flower flies. So this one on the flower is a flower fly, or a syrphid fly is another name for them. They often mimic bees or wasps, but they don't sting. The adults are feeding on nectar, whereas the larvae here, so the smaller larvae is in the lower photo. The smaller animal is the larvae of this flower fly that's actually feeding on an aphid. So you get kind of these groups with complete metamorphosis. The larvae will have a very different food source than what the adults have. So in this case, again, the adults are above ground, but the larvae are developing in the leaf litter of the soil, or on rotting wood, or on plants. Fireflies, I mentioned these at the beginning. These are also a soil insect because in their larval stage, which one example is shown there in the lower left, these are living in moist soil and in among leaf litter and under bark or in taller vegetation. And they are really amazing predators. They eat snails, slugs, earthworms, and caterpillars. Ground beetles. Again, here's a comparison showing what the adult looks like and what the larva looks like. Both of these live in the soil and the leaf litter. And both the larvae and the adults are predators that eat other animals. And some of the adult beetles are also decomposing material and eating seeds. So again, there's only one generation per year of ground beetle species, and adults can be quite long-lived, up to 4 years. They're very sensitive to tillage, and the kind of habitat here, bunch grasses is an important place for them to overwinter, and also to just kind of seek shelter between when they're going out into more open areas to hunt for their food. Burying beetles, these are pretty amazing. So there are burying beetles and carrion beetles. Both of them lay eggs in dead animals or dead animal tissue. So either within or in the soil below a dead animal. And when those eggs hatch, then the larvae come out and feed on that animal carcass. So they're important in that kind of cycling of nutrients here. And that's what you can see, one of the larvae feeding there, kind of in that soil carcass interface. And these are getting to be big enough that actually predatory mites can hitch rides on carrion and burying beetles and then drop off and feed on some of the flies. So other groups that are there in the carrion. Dung beetles, they use animals in a different way. So to complete the young stages of their life cycle using the manure or the dung. So these adults can really sense, just like the carrion and the burying beetles, they have a good sense of smell, where they can find what they're looking for, lay their eggs in the dung, and then the dung will really much more quickly cycle the nutrients in that manure back into the soil. This can actually help reduce problems with flies and the pathogens that affect livestock in areas when there's a healthy population of dung beetles. But again, looking at this from a bit more of an agricultural perspective, if there are pesticides that are used to treat cattle for parasites, then that can be, those chemicals can be passed on in the dung and then kill off dung beetles that begin feeding on it. And then you kind of lose those animals and the organism or the benefits that they provide. Okay, we're gonna round things up here with ground nesting bees. Again, bees are pollinators, but 70% of the nearly 4,000 native bee species in North America are ground nesters. The single mother will found a nest, she digs tunnels, and then she's out collecting pollen and nectar from flowers and taking that back to the nest. So they are a soil insect. This is a nice cutaway to show what a ground nesting bee's nest looks like. And you know, from above, it doesn't look like a lot. It'll just be a little hole there. Some of them have a chimney. Some of them will look more like an ant nest. But when you get to see the bees coming and going is when you really know what you found there. Then wasps are a different group. Wasps don't feed their larvae on pollen and nectar. They feed their larvae with prey, with animal food. But again, a lot of them are nesting in the soil. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly go through then very broad strokes of management practices and soil life. Concluded our run through some animal profiles. And if we look at the ways we can make choices about soil management, it's through tillage or disturbance, through the use of fertilizers or not, through the use of pesticides or not. And then also, again, going back to that soil health diagram, how we influence above ground diversity of plants and animals. So it's a simplified table showing how the choices that we make in each of those management factors either support more soil life or are less supportive of soil life. So tillage or soil disturbance is desiccating. It dries out the soil environment. It breaks the fungal hyphae. It destroys any existing tunnels, burrows, or nests of these soil invertebrates. And we get these spikes and losses with synthetic fertilizers. And then, of course, pesticides can directly kill the soil animals or kill the plants that they're depending on. So we get all these direct and indirect effects. I think I'm gonna just pause here, and I want to jump ahead just for the sake of time. Just get into resources here. So these links are also in the information that we'll be sharing. You really want to get deep. These are hundreds of pages of resources here, a global soil biodiversity atlas, another publication on the state of knowledge of soil biodiversity, and then something that's great for almost anyone is this book, The Life in Soil, a guide for naturalists and gardeners. And that's by Jim Nardi, whose illustrations we've been sharing. Xerces has loads of resources. We have an online publications library with all these things available as free downloads. We have a wonderful YouTube channel with recordings of all kinds of online trainings and webinars on many topics. We have a few of these in addition to our soil life that are more focused on agriculture, but that look at beneficial insects and creating habitat for them. We have a very simple two-sided one-page guide on soil scouting. That's a really easy way to download that, follow the instructions on it, and start observing and learning about what soils are, or what soil animals are in your area. There's also a lot going on that internationally about soil biodiversity, and that this website is full of all kinds of resources there. And NRCS, our federal agency, our federal department within USDA has several different web portals as well. So want to thank our funders, Western Sayre and Jim Nardi, and some of my Xerces coworkers who are part of this project. And again, Kate and Joe, and those of you at Coastside Land Trust for inviting me. Xerces is a donor-supported nonprofit, so you can join us as a member as well. And I'll end here with the statement that the soils of our yards, gardens, and fields swarm with thousands of kinds of minute animals and plants, of which we know little or nothing. We depend on the soil for our very existence, and yet the soil we daily tread underfoot is almost a veritable terra incognita. And that's a quote from the 1914 yearbook of the Department of Agriculture. So that takes us here to our little Q&A session here. Just also wanted to mention Xerces has great resources on firefly conservation. And I mentioned there's this West Coast, it's not there in Half Moon Bay where you are, but the Oregon giant earthworm is one of the endangered earthworm species that Xerces is working with.
And thank you. Here you're saying, there's just such an enormous number of these soil and invertebrates and such incredible life diversity that we know so little about. And thank you so much for being that sort of stepping point for a lot of us who know very little and now know a little bit more. So
a little bit more, yeah.
Yeah. Well, we've got a few questions, and then we'll kind of get into it. Just to reiterate what Stephanie was explaining is that there are a number of resources she's shared with us, and we'll be sharing those with a follow-up email. Also, just to get on that website, xerces.org, there's just an incredible a number of resources that I myself have used both in the classroom and out in the field. So I can't state that enough, how significant that resource, just a sort of a treasure trove of resources are connected to that site. So we have a few questions here. I'm going to start off with Mia. She was saying she's replaced all her grass with California native plants, but she does use mulch for weed prevention and uses that mulch for weed prevention and water conservation. She's wondering if there's a better way for her to support the soil and organisms that live in it.
Yeah, that's a great practice and observation. Of course, lawn conversion from water-hungry turf to something that's more adapted to the local climate, and that just provides more resources for biodiversity. And mulch is good because it does help hold in soil moisture. But if there's too much mulch, or there might be if it's a shredded wood mulch, there may be either natural chemicals in that or other types of preservatives that have been applied. So I'd check about the source of mulch that you're using. And I don't know the specific plants you have in your landscaping, but one kind of good suggestion is in the areas that are more visible, that's fine to cover those with mulch. If you have shrubs or places where you don't have the problem so much with weeds or with the soil drying out, you can leave those uncovered with mulch, and that will provide kind of the same benefit of bare soil that some of these animals need while balancing the benefits that you get from mulch.
Awesome. How about Rhonda's asking, how do I cultivate and dig out my garden without causing harm to billions of organisms?
I hear you. I know it's the same thing. I think just as agriculture is moving towards more no-till, more cover crops, all those regenerative practices, again, that's part of the soil health principles, not disturbing the soil and having continuous living roots. And it's certainly possible to apply those principles to your gardening, whether it's flower beds or your vegetable gardens. You can use things like whatever's appropriate for you locally, whether that's some type of chopped up leaf litter or wheat straw or whatever type of byproduct like that you have. It's more decomposable than wood mulch. And that will help both suppress the weeds. You can even, put that down for several months, kind of in your non-growing season, or as you rotate between different parts of your garden and do site prep, like prepare that seed bed that way, really by covering the soil. Sheet mulching is a technical term for that approach. Sometimes you layer pieces of corrugated cardboard, and then you may put wood chips or these other mulches on there, and you just let that decompose over time, and then voila, there's your like new seed bed ready for the garden. So those are some ways that you can minimize, tilling up the garden, but still having a good place to plant what you want to grow.
That's a good plethora of options.
Yeah.
What about rocks that are used as ground cover? Myrna's asking.
Yeah, rocks can be good in some cases. You're favoring more nesting sites or sheltering sites for some of these larger soil invertebrates. I'm thinking of the ground nesting bees or some of the beetles, but again, because there won't be any living roots there, that's kind of shutting off the overall food supply to that particular patch of soil. So I would just kind of say the same thing about rocks in landscaping as I would with mulch. Use it sparingly and strategically.
Symbol is asking, does adding compost to soil help specific insects?
Does adding compost to soil help specific insects?
Yeah, or just insects in general.
Yeah, it's certainly beneficial. When you're adding compost, you're generally adding a lot more organic matter. And although it may just look like brown and crumbly to us, if we were one of these tiny organisms, it has a whole different perspective, right? It's a big piece of food in front of us that can be eaten and kind of just begin to continue to channel and cycle nutrients and then release them when they're in the more compound form. And then that's what plants can use also. So yeah, compost is part of feeding the soil, but again, those living plant roots are the real main way to feed the soil.
Okay, a couple of shorter ones here, and then we've got a couple that might take a little bit more thought here, or a little longer explanation. One of them is Molly and Ken use juniper wood chips for their mulch. Is it bad for the soil due to the oil from the juniper?
No, I don't think so. In general, everything in moderation. There are other parts of the world that use pine needles as their mulch, and it's less of a concern because of the oil or any of the chemicals naturally in the mulch material. When we talk about soil organisms, I think what's again more relevant is whether you're allowing those animals to have access to enter into and exit the soil.
Okay, yeah. And someone was asking, they were saying, in decades past, we needed to clean our windshields frequently while driving on the highways, and because of numerous insects, because of the, hitting the windshield. He's saying today I can drive from San Francisco Bay Area to LA without needing to clean the windshield, which shows quite dramatically the decline in insects. He said, well, what can we do about this highway insect slaughter short of not driving?
Yeah. Well, that kind of observation is one that many people make, compared when years ago or when they were younger, right? Or just remembering how many insects would build up on the headlights or the windshield. And yeah, it is a slaughter, but it's more actually a way to observe how fewer insects there are. Transportation and traffic is one of the ways that insects are killed, but it's not the primary cause of insect decline. More like what you're observing on your windshield is just evidence that insects are declining in general. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hopefully the work that Xerces is doing and the work that each of you are doing in your own little part of the world will help to counteract that.
Same participant was asking, when you have sponsors, like if any of the like General Mills and things like that, did they practice? Have they learned to practice good soil conservation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Xerces, when we're working in agriculture, we have sort of two main ways. We work with some of the government agencies like NRCS, and NRCS provides funding and conservation guidance to individual farmers to implement practices on their land, and our staff helps with that technical support. And then the other pathway is with companies and the farms that are growing the food that go into their brands. So our work with General Mills has been with several of their brands in working to include more pollinator habitat, to reduce pesticide use, to add beneficial insect habitat on those farms. And we've developed a third-party certification called Be Better Certified. So that is now in Costco stores on Silk almond milk. Costco has decided they're only going to source and sell almond milk that's Be Better certified. So again, that's kind of the consumer-facing end of a lot of work that's gone into decisions by Costco in this case, for an example, and then the almond farms that Silk is working with in sourcing, and then the practices that are being implemented on the ground in those almond orchards.
Can you speak a little bit to how wildfires affect soil health?
Yeah. So, fire is a natural element and an important element for so many ecosystems. But of course, now in our present day, we've got extreme fire, much hotter fire, fuel buildup, and we've got this intense fire cycle that is not healthy. So hopefully we can get back to healthier fire. But fire, consumes a lot of what it touches, and that includes insects. Many insects can flee fire, but of course, if it's a huge fire or fast enough, they're not going to be able to flee. Insects and other animals that are in the soil, they're insulated from a lot of the heat of the soil, again, depending on what type of fuel the fire is burning and how long that fire is in that place. But soil is a really good insulator. So, certainly the first few inches or maybe even deeper can kind of be sterilized by fire. Some animals, again, if they have enough time, they can move deeper into the soil, kind of away from the heat, and escape mortality that way. So yeah, it varies a lot. Mm-hmm.
To piggyback actually on that, because this is a good question, that the sort of on a short-term basis, that idea of like solarization, black tarps and things being used to suppress weeds on a temporary basis. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, I'm glad that question came up, because it's the same kind of concept. So solarization is putting black plastic or clear plastic and getting a greenhouse effect, against bare soil, with the intent of preparing that site for planting. So you're trying to kill weed seeds and trying to kill any existing vegetation is there with this solarization method. And if it's effectively killing the seeds and the vegetation, it's killing the other microbes or small animals that are there in the soil. But again, it's just really happening in the first few inches. There's no evidence that the effects of solarization go much deeper than that. And fungi and bacteria can colonize that area again, and so can these other invertebrates that move around. So when we look at like the options, and this goes back to the gardening tillage question, kind of the worst thing for soil health is tillage, and repeated tillage is even worse. Then using some kind of chemical methods, like herbicides, right? Often that is a combination of tillage with an herbicide. You've disturbed the soil and you've removed the living roots. So two no-nos with soil health. Then if you look at solarization, I think that's kind of the next layer of harm benefit of options. And then that sheet mulching approach would be our kind of best recommendation for getting some soil ready so you can plant in it without harming and actually even encouraging, I would say, more soil organisms there is through sheet mulching.
Great. Okay, two more questions and we'll close it off. I think we'll have gotten them all. There's one
Okay.
attendee was asking about banana slugs. Did you have anything you wanted to say about banana slugs? I guess they were just curious about.
Gosh, yeah. I don't have much to add about banana slugs. Honestly, our work so far with soil life has been more on slugs as different species of slugs that are pests in agriculture. But that allows me to kind of open things up here, whether it's through follow-up email, but our work has been funded for sustainable agriculture, but we're really interested in working with natural areas and the species that occur in those places and expanding our soil life work there too. So if Coastside, you guys have ideas or suggestions of materials that would be helpful for you, I'd like to hear those. So I'm going to write down banana slugs as one of those.
Okay, great. Okay, and then the last question we have is, and this is from Joan, and just maybe any last minute ideas for her. She was saying she has a field of about an acre, which is normally just grass, coyote brush, lupin bushes. They usually mow it once a year and leave the grass on site. She wants to plant more flowering shrubs to help the wild bees on the San Mateo coast. Any suggestions for her field? No irrigation. She doesn't have any irrigation.
Okay. Yeah, we have, I'm not going to have like any specific plant species recommendations now, but I can follow up. We have a nice like pre-made list for different regions of California with pollinator plants and suggestions on where to get those plants from, what time of year,
and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah, and I have a project I work with down in the San Joaquin Valley, and I flew into San Francisco last September. I drove down Highway 1. I know I went right past you guys then, but didn't know to look for you at the time. So
you didn't know how integral you'd be to this community. It's true.
Yeah. So it's a nice full circle here.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And we really appreciate you taking this time. And for those of you who have stuck around, Stephanie is going to be doing another presentation in just another few minutes. So we're going to make sure we let her go. But we're really grateful for this lens to soil health and the life within it. I think there's a lot of us who've learned a lot in just this hour of being together. So thank you for this time.
Yep. And thank you all for your interest. Yeah, thank you all for your interest in your work on conservation. Thank you.
Yeah, and please, when we will be sending a follow-up email out by, it'll get to you by Monday. And so take a look at some of these resources. I think that next level, we've got a great entry point. And for many, many folks, this will just wetting our whistle to get us really looking a little deeper. And Stephanie's provided with us a large number of resources that we'll be attaching to the follow-up email. So check those out. We'll have the recording. Please share that. This is critical time and critical information to be sharing with people in our community. I think it's a new science and new learning for a lot of people. And the more that we can spread the word, the more good we can be doing. And certainly that this isn't a false segue into donation to the Coastside Land Trust. I mean, supporting organizations like Xerces and the Coastside Land Trust is critical. This is critical time. We're to be taking care of our lands and soil and both the invertebrates and vertebrates within this area. Very, very important. So take that time. If this is, you're here on this Saturday, get to it before you forget about it. Make some donations, please, to the Coastside Land Trust and also to Xerces to support really, really critical habitat stewardship and maintaining these species. Also, we'll also have for those of you, all of you who are on here are on our emails. We really try hard not to send a lot of them. So don't unsubscribe because we're keeping those minimal. But we will be letting you know of another. We have Tony Corelli, who some of you are probably familiar with, is a local botanist and author, and she's going to be doing a presentation on the history of botanical explorations exactly a month from now. So March 26th should be fascinating. She actually put this whole piece together and came to us and said, this is something that I don't think a lot of people know a lot about. So we're thrilled to have her here with us in a month. So check out that follow-up email, check out the resources that will be coming your way. Also share the word. Check out all of our presence on social media, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. And we will see many of you, I think a lot of you who are interested and are sticking around, will probably see you again in about a month. So thank you again, Stephanie, and good luck with the work that you're doing.
Thank you. Same to you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.